They gave her the broken chair and the desk nobody wanted, the one in the corner where the stove never reached. The men in the railroad telegraph office of Cutter's Bend, Wyoming, expected Della Hartwell to last a week. She was 24, and she had already been told twice that morning that the wire was no place for a woman's nerves. Della said nothing. She sat. She listened. What none of them understood yet was that listening was the whole of the craft, and she was the best listener in the room. They would not learn it gently. They would learn it on a night still weeks away, a night with snow coming sideways and a passenger train running full of sleeping people toward a mile of rail, with nothing under it but black water. A night when the only thing standing between that train and the bottom of a creek would be one woman's ear. None of them could have guessed it that first morning. Neither could she. She only knew the rule her old teacher had given her. The men who doubt you will doubt you right up until the moment they need you, and not 1 second longer. The office was a single long room above the freight platform, smelling of coal smoke and machine oil and the wet wool of men who spent their days in the cold. 2 windows faced the rail yard. Through them she could watch the snow bury the sidings, and watch the eastbound and the westbound crawl in like tired animals, breathing steam. Between the windows stood the instruments, and the instruments were the only things in that room she trusted. The one on her desk was a sounder, a small brass armature mounted on a wooden resonator. It clicked when the current ran down the line, and clicked again when the current stopped. To the men loitering by the stove, it was a nuisance, a tin cricket that never shut up. To Della, it was a voice that never stopped talking, and that was the thing that put a cold weight in her chest. A voice that never stops is a voice that will, sooner or later, say the one thing you are not ready to hear. She only knew, the way you know weather before it turns, that this wire would speak of something terrible before the winter was out, and that she would be the one sitting under it when it did. She had learned the one truth the whole trade turned on. The telegraph was never read with the eyes at all. It was heard. She sat with her hands folded in her lap and let the rhythm enter her ear, and the dots and the dashes became words faster than any hand could ever write them. The man who taught her that had a name and a story, and she would carry both the rest of her life. But the men by the stove did not ask, and she did not tell. On the first day she gave them only the second of his 2 great rules, the one he had pressed on her hardest. When your time comes, he had said, and it will, do not gloat. The ones who doubted you will feel it enough on their own. She believed him. She had nowhere else to put her faith. She folded her hands, and she closed her eyes, and she let the room's contempt run off her like water, and under it, steady as a heartbeat, the wire went on talking. The senior operator was a heavy, florid man named Garrett, who sent with a great deal of flourish and a great deal of noise. He had been on the Cutter's Bend wire 11 years, and he made certain everyone knew the figure. "You'll want to watch your tape close. Missy," he told her, jerking his chin at the inker, the machine that pressed the dots and dashes into a moving paper strip. "Easy to lose your place if you don't keep your eyes on it." "I don't use the tape," Della said. Garrett laughed, and a young operator near the door laughed with him to be safe. "Everybody uses the tape. It is sound, not sight," she said. She did not say it to win anything. She said it the way you'd say the sun comes up in the east. A dot is a tap. A dash is a tap held 3 times as long. The tape is for men who can't hear yet. That landed harder than she intended, and Garrett's color came up, and he turned back to his own key with his jaw set. Della let it go. She had not come to make enemies. She had come to work the wire, and the wire did not care who was angry. But she filed the moment away, because she had heard something in the room she did not like. Not in the men, in the instrument. Far down the line past Rawlins, a hand was sending a routine yard order, and it was a clean hand, quick and even, and under it, every few minutes, the current dropped for a half-second too long, a tiny stutter where there should have been none. A loose connection somewhere, or a span loading with wet snow. To Garrett it was nothing. To Della it was a cough in an otherwise healthy chest, and she had learned, long ago and at some cost, that the wire coughs before it dies. She said nothing about that either. Not yet. You did not, on your first morning, tell 11-year men that their line was sick. The wire also went to Marshal Crane. Crane was the railroad's division man, sent west to tighten a line the company felt had gone slack. Slow orders, lost cars, a culture of men who had been on the same wire so long they had stopped trying. He did not like surprises, and he did not like anything he could not put a number to. A woman at the second desk was a surprise he could not number, and so he stood behind her the whole first full day with his pocket watch open in his hand, counting. "Garrett does 40 words a minute on a good run," he said. "Let us see what the lady manages." Della took the next train order off the wire from Rawlins. She did not reach for a pencil. She folded her hands and closed her eyes. The sounder ran fast, faster, Crane thought, than any honest woman ought to be able to follow, and her lips moved once, silently, and then she opened her eyes and wrote the whole order out clean in a single unbroken pass, every siding and every car number in its place, and slid the paper across the desk to him without a word. 38, she said. It came in at 38. I can take 50 if the hand is clean. That one was not clean, and not because of the sender. There's a fault on the line east of here. The current's dropping out. You'll want a lineman on it before the snow gets worse. Crane read the order. He read it twice. It was perfect, down to the last figure. The business about the line he ignored entirely. He closed his watch with a small, definite click. "Luck," he said, and walked out. But he had heard it too. The speed of her, the ease of her. And a man who has spent his whole career counting other men's mistakes for a living knows, in his gut, the particular silence of someone who is not making any. It bothered him the rest of the day, the way an unfinished sum bothers a careful clerk, a small wrong note that will not stop sounding until it is resolved. That night, alone after the others had gone, Della unwrapped the things she carried everywhere in a square of oilcloth. A brass telegraph key, worn bright on the lever where one thumb had pressed it 10,000 times. It was not hers, originally. It had belonged to the man who taught her, and holding it was the closest she came to pray. His name was Josiah Penn, and he had taken her on as a girl of 15 in a depot office 200 miles east, when her father died under a runaway wagon and the family needed a wage and no one else in that town would hire a girl to do a man's work. It is sound, not sight, he had told her on that first day, and he covered the paper tape with his hand so she could not cheat by watching it. A dot is a tap. A dash is a tap held 3 times as long. Now here are the spaces, because the spaces are the part that fools people. 1 beat of silence inside a letter. 3 beats of silence between letters. 7 beats of silence between words. Keep those 3 silences straight in your head and you can read a man you have never met, in a town you will never see, in the pitch dark. He made her learn the alphabet not in order, but by frequency, because that was how the code itself had been built. The most common letters given the shortest signals. So a quick letter never wasted a long one. E was a single dot, the fastest letter in the language, because it was the one the language used most. T was a single dash. A was a dot and a dash. And S was 3 dots, and O 3 dashes. She drove them by candle until her own pulse seemed to tick in 1s and 3s and 7s, until she dreamed in them. She practiced now the way she did most nights, sending into a dead loop and taking imaginary traffic, because Penn had told her that the day you stop practicing is the day the wire starts getting away from you. Outside, the snow ticked against the glass. The stutter on the eastern line was still there. She counted it without meaning to. Twice a minute now. It had been once a minute that morning. The wire was getting sicker, and nobody else could hear it. The trouble with Garrett was not his speed. His fingers were fast enough. The trouble with Garrett was his ear, and the fact that he did not really have one. He had learned the craft in the old way, off the paper tape, reading the marks with his eyes as the inked stylus pressed them into the moving strip. He had never fully made the leap to reading by sound, and he had spent 11 years hiding the fact. When the line was quiet and the hands at the far end were tidy, no one could tell the difference. But the wire, in a Wyoming winter, was rarely quiet. Snow loaded the spans until they sang. A loose connection turned crisp signals into mush. A tired sender at midnight ran his letters together until the careful spacing collapsed into a smear of clicks. That was where Garrett drowned, and that was where Della swam. One night in February, a request came down the line for a stock car to be held at the Bitter Creek siding. Garrett took it half listening, his eyes on the tape, and wrote 2 cars. Della, 3 feet away with her hands folded in her lap, heard the difference plainly. The distant sender had run his S and his T close together, crowding the silence between them, and Garrett's eye had read the smear and filled the missing gap with a number that had never been sent. He said stock, she told him quietly. It is 1 word, not a count. 1 car, hold the 1. Garrett bristled and the color came up in his heavy face. I've been on this wire 11 years. Then you've been guessing for 11 years, she said, not unkindly. Ask him to repeat. It costs nothing but a moment, and a wrong car at Bitter Creek costs the whole night. He did it sourly, jamming the key down harder than he needed to. The distant sender repeated. 1 stock car. Garrett said nothing else for the rest of his shift, but before he left he moved his chair, just slightly, so that the next night he could watch how she sat, still, eyes shut, hands folded, letting the silences do the work his eyes had been doing badly for over a decade. She did not crow about it. She remembered pen on the matter of gloating, and felt no triumph, only recognition. Because this was the thing she had understood about the wire long before she could put it into words. Every hand on the line was a person reaching across 100 miles of cold and dark to be heard exactly, and most of them were heard only roughly, the meaning filled in with a guess. Della had spent her whole life wanting to be heard exactly, and so rarely gotten it that she had turned the wanting around. She had become the one who heard others that way instead. To be truly heard is the oldest hunger there is, and the wire was nothing but that hunger made into sound, stretched taut across a continent in the dark. In the first week of March, the railroad sent a new operator out to Cutter's Bend, and his name was Lyle Hobbs. Hobbs was younger than Garrett and a great deal cleaner, with a city haircut and a pressed collar and a way of saying back in the Omaha office that wore thin inside a day. He had been trained on the newest equipment, and he sent very fast and very showy. And he had decided 2 things about Della Hartwell before he ever sat down: that a woman at a second desk was a charity case the division had taken on to look modern, and that the fastest sender in any room was the best operator in it, which, plainly, was going to be him. Speed is the whole game, he told the office his first afternoon, rattling off a string into the dead loop at a pace that made Garrett grunt with grudging respect. You're either quick or you're freight. Sending is muscle, Della said, not looking up. You build it with your wrist like a fiddler. Anyone can learn to send fast. Receiving is the gift. Hobbs smiled the way men smile when they have already decided not to listen. We'll see whose gift the company keeps when the next pay cut comes around. There it was, the thing she had felt in the room before she could name it. There was not work enough on a frontier wire for every operator stationed there, and one of them would be let go before spring. Hobbs intended it to be the woman, and he meant to make the case himself, in numbers, the only language the division understood. He began to keep a tally in a little book, her sending speed against his. The minutes she sat with her eyes shut doing nothing while he rattled the key. He never once thought to count the errors she did not make. because he could not hear them, any more than Garrett could. Della watched him build his case, and something in her went hard and cold and steady, like iron left out in the snow. She did not flinch, and she did not plead. Let him keep his book. She had buried a teacher and outworked a roomful of men twice her age, and a thin man with ink in his knuckles had taught her there is no arguing with a man who is sure. So she would not argue. She would outlast him and let the wire settle it. The way the wire settled everything in the end. The line's cough turned into something worse on a Tuesday. A bridge inspection report came down. Figures, timber counts, a recommendation about a culvert west of town. It was exactly the kind of traffic the new fault chewed up. The current dropped out twice in the middle of it, eating whole letters, and the relief man taking it down lost his place, left a word blank in the most important line, and was too proud to ask the sender to repeat. The report went into the file half finished, and nobody thought about it again. That was the part that nearly killed people later. A message half heard is not a small thing put aside. It is a loaded gun left in a drawer. Hobbs, meanwhile, turned the bad line into a weapon. "The wire's noisy, sure," he announced. "Good operators send through noise. You hit it harder and faster." And he drove the key down like he was hammering a nail. "You can't outshout a bad line," Della said. "You're loading the fault. Send slower and clean and ask for repeats, or you'll burn the span clean through and we'll have no wire at all the night we need it most." "The night we need it most," Hobbs repeated, delighted. "You hear that, Garrett?" She's a fortune teller now, but Garrett did not laugh. He had moved his chair weeks ago to watch how she sat, and somewhere in his slow, stubborn way he had started to trust the woman's ear over his own eyes. He looked at the inker, and he looked at the half-finished report in the file, and a cold thing turned over in his gut. "Maybe ease off the key, Hobbs," he said carefully. Hobbs eased off nothing. He hammered the wire all week. Crane came back at the end of that week with a problem he could not solve with a watch. It was the bridge report, the botched one, the one with a blank. Someone in Omaha had finally read it and wired back sharply, demanding to know why a culvert flag as failing had a timber count missing. The division wanted the number, and it wanted it today. And the relief man, who had lost it, could not produce it. Crane did not bring it to Hobbs, though Hobbs was the man he had been told to favor. He had stopped, somewhere in the last weeks, trusting the loudest hand in the room. He brought it to the second desk instead, careful not to say out loud why. Della read the bad transcription through twice, her finger moving along the broken lines. "Whoever took this was reading by eye, on a bad line, in a hurry," she said. "He split one word into two, because the spacing fooled him into hearing a gap that wasn't there. In this blank, in the timber count, the sender almost certainly ran a 5 and an S together. They sit close in a fast hand. The figure is 56, not a 5 and an empty space. You cannot know that," Crane said. "Not from the paper," she agreed. "But the wire will know. Have them send the whole report again, raw and slow, and I'll take it by ear." He hesitated, then did it, put the call through himself and asked the distant office to send slow. Against every instinct, Hobbs had been preaching all week. The far key opened. Della folded her hands and shut her eyes. And here was where the thing Penn had taught her about fear mattered most. The distant sender, hurried and harried by Omaha, started fast and frightened, and his spacing began to collapse exactly the way Penn had warned her. A frightened hand always does. So Della did the simplest cure on the whole wire. She sent back, slow and even. The single letter R received. R again. Received. The rhythm of a calm hand telling a nervous one, "I have you. Slow down. I am here." The distant hand steadied. The spacing opened back up where it belonged. And the report came down whole and clean. And the blank filled itself in exactly as she had said. 56. Crane stood very still over the paper. A woman he had once timed with a stopwatch like a horse at a fair had just read the original sender's hand straight out of another man's mistakes and steadied a frightened stranger across 200 miles of wire to do it. "How?" he said. It was not quite a question. "It is sound, not sight," she said. "A man named Penn taught me. He's dead now. At the end, his hands shook too badly to hold a key. He couldn't send at all, but he could still hear better than any of us." That was when I understood the hearing was the real thing all along. She turned the worn brass key over in her fingers. "He told me a frightened man always crowds his spacing. You don't argue with fear over a wire. You answer it slow and even, until it remembers how to breathe." Crane did not say luck this time. He folded the report slowly and put it in the breast of his coat. And then, for the first time since he had come to Cutter's Bend, he pulled a chair up to the second desk and sat down in it, beside her, instead of standing behind her with a watch. He took to coming by in the evenings after that, when the day traffic thinned. He told himself it was to understand the wire, but the truth was simpler. He came to watch her work. There was a stillness in her when she listened that he had never seen in another living person. And a man who had spent his whole life counting and timing and pushing found that he could sit beside that stillness and, for an hour, stop. She taught him the code in those evenings, a little at a time. He was a poor student, and they both laughed about it. His ear was a ledger keeper's ear, fine for adding a column and useless for hearing a man's mood in a click. But he learned the spaces, 1 beat inside a letter, 3 between letters, 7 between words, and learned to hear, dimly, what she heard plainly, and the dimness of it gave him a respect for her gift that no demonstration could have. "You could send for a better post than this," he said one night. "Cheyenne, Denver." I could see it done. "I could," she said. "But the wire's the same everywhere, and the night's coming when this office will need the best ear it has. And I would rather it had mine." She did not say where the certainty came from. She only knew the line was getting sicker by the day, and Hobbs was still hammering it. She could hear the shape of trouble the way she could hear a sender's mood. It was coming. She meant to be at the desk when it did. Crane heard the certainty and did not understand it, and trusted it anyway, which is the beginning of a particular kind of love. He left without his hat twice and came back for it and stayed longer. Hobbs noticed and added it to his little book, and decided the woman was keeping her desk by turning the division man's head, which was easier to believe than the truth. The wire's first real failure came on a clear, cold Thursday, and it was small, and it was the only warning anyone got. A westbound freight had orders to take the siding at Antelope and let a special run through. But the special schedule had changed at the last minute, and the change came down the failing line, and the fault ate it. The current dropped at exactly the wrong half-second, and the word delayed came across the office sounder as a smear that Hobbs, on the key that hour, hammered an acknowledgement to without truly hearing. Della heard the smear. She heard the dropout under it, and she heard, in the cadence of the distant dispatcher, the particular tightness of a man sending something he badly needs understood. That wasn't an acknowledgement they wanted, she said, already on her feet. The special's not delayed. It's running early. The freight's going to take the siding too late, and there'll be 2 trains wanting the same iron at Antelope. I acknowledged it, Hobbs snapped. It's done. Then unacknowledge it. She did not wait for him. She took the key out from under his hand, the only time in her life she ever took a key from another operator by force, and she sent, slow and clean against the failing line, asking the dispatcher to repeat and then relaying the corrected order down to Antelope herself. Every space exactly the right length, so the fault could chew on it all it liked and still not lose a letter. The freight took the siding with 4 minutes to spare. The special blew through clean. 4 minutes. That was all the room there had been. In the hard silence afterward, Garrett let out a long breath. Hobbs sat with his hand still half curled where the key had been, white around the mouth, and for the first time he had nothing to say. "The line's dying," Della said to the room quietly. "I've told you, stop hammering it. The next time the fault eats a message, it may eat the one that matters, and there may not be 4 minutes." This time nobody laughed. But the line did not get fixed. The company did not send a lineman. A fault that only sometimes dropped out did not seem, on paper in an office in Omaha, like an emergency. The thaw broke a culvert under the grade west of town in the last hard week of the cold. The very culvert the lost bridge report had flagged, the one the company had filed away and forgotten. The dispatcher did not know it. That was how the night nearly went wrong. The eastbound passenger train was due through Cutter's Bend at 2:15 in the morning, full of people asleep in their berths, families, a peddler, 2 nuns, a man going home to a funeral. A section hand walking the line had seen the meltwater undercutting the rails where the culvert had given way, and he had run nearly 2 miles through the snow to the only open key he knew of, a lonely repeater box at a place called Hollis Tank. The only soul there was a half-asleep relief man who was not much of an operator and never had been. His sending came down the line broken and panicked and far too fast, the hand of a frightened man who had learned his code off a printed card and never once practiced it under fear, never learned what fear does to a man's spacing. And it came down a line that was already half dead, the fault dropping the current out every few seconds, eating the front half of his words. Garrett had gone home hours before. Hobbs had the night shift, and Hobbs was asleep with his boots on the stove rail, because a quiet night was a chance to rest and a dying line was, to his ear, just so much noise. Della was there too. She had been there nearly every night for weeks, drilling on her own time, waiting for the things she could hear coming. She did not trust the night to Hobbs. She had said so to no one but Crane. The sounder began to clatter, and it was ugly. Letters jammed into each other. Spacing gone entirely. The same fragment hammered over and over by a man too scared to slow down, and half of each fragment swallowed by the dying wire. Hobbs woke at the noise, listened a moment, and said, "Some drunk leaning on a key out at the tank." Ignore it. And he closed his eyes again. And here was the awful thing the whole night turned on. He was almost right. To any ear but one, that was exactly what it was. Noise, nonsense. A drunk's clumsy hand. A poorer ear would have agreed with him and gone back to the stove, and a train full of sleeping people would have run on toward the water in the dark, and no one would ever have known there had been a warning at all. It was an alarm with nothing inside it, to everyone in that office but her. Della heard the words. She heard "wash out," torn nearly in half by the man's nerves, and again by the failing line, the pieces scattered. She heard "west of," and a place named battered to fragments, and a time. She heard him drop his spacing in exactly the way Penn had warned her, 20 years of patience ago, that a frightened man always would. And she did not guess. That was the whole of it. That was the thing the trade lived and died on. She did not fill the broken silence with the words she feared was in it. Instead, she did the thing Penn had taught her for a panicking sender, the thing the whole craft came down to in the end. She sent back slow and steady and even, the simplest signal on the wire R, received R again, received. The rhythm of a calm hand reaching across the dart to a frightened one. "I have you. Slow down. Send it to me again." It worked the way it had always worked. The frightened man at Hollis Tank steadied. His next sending came slower and cleaner, and the spaces opened back up where they belonged, and on the slower sending the failing line dropped fewer letters. Because she'd been right about that too. A clean, slow message survives a bad wire that a hammered fast one cannot. Hobbs was awake now, sitting up, watching her with his mouth open. He had heard the same noise she had, and called it a drunk. He understood finally and completely, in the space of a minute, exactly what he had been keeping a tally against. She had it whole now. The culvert was gone. The west grade. The eastbound due at 2:15, less than an hour out and running straight at a mile of rail with nothing under it but rushing black water. She opened the line to the dispatcher, and she sent. And her sending, the muscle part, the part she had once shrugged off as the lesser of the two gifts, the part Hobbs had built his whole little book around, was flawless. She sent the order to hold the eastbound at the last open station before the grade, every letter crisp, every space exactly the right length, 3 beats between the letters and 7 between the words, so that no tired man at the far end and no fault on the dying line could fill a gap with the wrong number and pass the train along by mistake. She sent it the way she had spent her whole life wishing the world would speak to her, completely and clearly, and without a single thing left over to be guessed at. "Help me," she said to Hobbs, not looking up. And it was not a plea. It was an order, the first one she had ever given him. The line drops every few seconds. "When the current's good, I send. You watch the inker, and you tell me the instant it cuts, so I don't send into a dead wire. Now." And Hobbs, who had built a case against her in numbers all winter, leaned over the inker and called the dropouts for her like a man calling soundings off the bow of a boat. And between the two of them, in the cracks of a dying wire, the order went down the line whole. The dispatcher caught it clean. The order ran down the line. The eastbound stopped at the water tank with the broken grade still a full mile ahead in the dark, the rushing of the unseen water just barely audible under the hiss of the standing engine. The engineer climbed down with a lantern and walked the mile forward to see for himself, and came back white and did not say much. No one in the berths ever learned how close it had come. They grumbled about the delay and went back to sleep, and that, the grumbling, the going back to sleep, the not knowing, was the whole prize. That was what a good ear bought, an ordinary morning for people who never found out they had nearly not had one. When the answering R came back up the line, confirming the train was stopped and safe, Della set her hands flat on the desk and found that they were shaking. Now, after, the way pens had shaken at the end, the way a body does when the fear it had no time for finally arrives. Hobbs straightened slowly from the inker. He looked at his little book, the tally of her sending speeds and her silent minutes, and he picked it up, tore it in half, and dropped the pieces in the stove. He made no speech about it. He just said after a while, in a voice she had not heard from him before, "Teach me to hear like that. It takes years," she said. "I've got years," said Hobbs. By morning, the whole division knew. By noon, Marshal Crane was back in the office, and the men who had given Della the broken chair in the cold corner found they could not quite meet her eye. Crane was not built for speeches. He set his hat down on the corner of her desk and said the only thing that needed saying. "I timed you with a watch like you were a horse at a county fair. I called you lucky. And then a girl I called Lucky sat alone in this room at 2 in the morning, read a terrified man's broken hand off a dying wire nobody else could make sense of, and kept a train full of sleeping people out of a river." He looked at the others, slow, and there was iron in it now. "She is not the second operator in this office. She is the first, and she has been since the morning she walked in, and the rest of us were too busy laughing to notice. You will learn to read by ear, the way she does, or you will learn it from her. Because she is the finest ear on this line, and I have run clean out of reasons to doubt it, and so, gentlemen, have you." He had brought a lineman with him this time, and the order to fix the eastern fault for good. The wire would not be left to die again. He had seen what it cost. Then he turned back to her, and his voice dropped. "You knew," he said. "You told me a night was coming." "How?" "The wire tells you everything if you'll listen. It was coughing the day I walked in. I just heard it." She paused. "Penn taught me that too. He could hear a thing dying long before it died. I think it's why he kept teaching after his hands quit. He could hear his own time coming, and he wanted to pour the gift into somebody before the wire took it back. And do you want to do the same? More than anything," she said. Then do it, Crane said. I'll see the railroad pays for the lamp oil. He did not apologize in words. Men like Marshall Crane almost never can. But he crossed the room and took the good, sturdy chair he had once sat in to count her mistakes, and carried it to the second desk and set it down beside hers. So there would be 2 chairs at the second desk from now on, and everyone in the room understood what that meant. She taught. By the next winter there were 3 girls and 2 boys gathered in a half-circle around her desk in the lamplight, snow ticking at the windows, and she taught them in Josiah Penn's own words because she had never found better ones. It is sound, not sight. A dot is a tap, a dash is a tap, held 3 times as long. 1 beat of silence inside a letter, 3 between letters, 7 between words. Learn the alphabet by how often the letters come. So the quick signals belong to the quick letters, and you never waste a long one on an E. And above all, trust the silence, because the silence is where the meaning lives. And the day you start filling it with what you expect instead of what is there is the day the wire starts to lie to you. Garrett came too, to his lasting credit, and the first night he read a snow-loaded message, clean through by ear alone, he laughed out loud like a boy who had stayed up on a horse. Hobbs was the most stubborn student she ever had, because he had the most to unlearn, but he got it in the end. And Marshall Crane married her late, in a small spring ceremony with the wire humming faintly through the wall of the next room, so that the 2 chairs at the second desk became a standing truth in that office, that the division man had come west to tighten the slack line and been brought up short, instead, by the one operator he could not put a number to. Della Hartwell ran the Cutter's Bend office for the better part of 30 years, and trained operators who scattered into mining camps and cattle towns and lonely repeater boxes 100 miles from anywhere. The wire, it turned out, had never once cared whose hand was on the key or whose name was in the paybook. It only ever cared who was truly listening. She kept Penn's brass key on the desk to the end of her days, worn bright on the lever, and when a new student asked whose it was, she would close their hand over it the way he had closed hers and tell them. The wire will carry anything you can hear, she told them, the way he had told her. So learn to hear better than the rest of the world. Everyone alive wants to be heard exactly. Be the one who hears them that way. That was her legacy, and her students carried it farther than any train ever ran.